The marriage had been arranged for convenience, but when he whispered those words in her ear during their first night at the centuries-old vineyard estate in Napa Valley, she knew her life was about to transform in ways she never could have imagined. Sometimes the decisions we make out of necessity become the doors that lead us to our true destiny, she reflected, as his warm breath caressed her neck. Emily Parker, just 22 years old, trembled slightly as she gazed at the vineyards and towering redwoods of Napa Valley through the mahogany-framed windows of the master bedroom. Moonlight bathed the landscape in an ethereal glow that seemed straight out of a dream. The scent of wisteria and oak barrel aging rooms permeated her senses, mingling with the sophisticated masculine cologne that emanated from Michael Reynolds, her husband of less than 48 hours. Her delicate hands held the glass of Cabernet Sauvignon that he had personally selected from the estate's century-old cellar. She had never tasted wine so complex, with flavors that seemed to tell stories of past generations, of land kissed by the intense California sun. "Do you like it?" he asked, his deep voice resonating in his chest before reaching the air. "It's different from anything I've ever tasted," she replied, searching for the right words. As if each sip contained a different story. Michael smiled, and for an instant Emily glimpsed something in his eyes that contradicted the image of the cold, 46-year-old businessman she had agreed to marry. A flash of vulnerability, perhaps, or a secret too deep to be revealed so soon. "The best things in life are like that," he said, moving close enough to stand just inches from her. Complex, unexpected, impossible to decipher at first glance. His fingers brushed the edge of the glass she held. "Like you, Emily." The silence that followed was charged with unspoken expectations. Emily felt the weight of the decisions that had led her to this moment. Her family business going bankrupt, the suffocating debts, the marriage proposal that had come as a pragmatic solution to problems that had seemed insurmountable. And now she was here, in a Napa Valley estate dating back 400 years, married to a man she barely knew. "Are you ready?" he whispered in her ear, and though the questions seemed to refer to the night ahead, Emily sensed it held a much deeper meaning. That night, as the wind gently swayed the ancient redwoods and stars shone intensely over Napa Valley, Emily couldn't imagine that this whisper would be the first of many secrets she would discover in the coming months. Secrets that would transform not just her marriage, but the very essence of who she was. The first weeks at the estate passed like a feverish dream for Emily. She awoke each morning in that room with its high ceilings and noble wood paneling, wondering if this place would ever stop feeling like a borrowed stage for her life. Michael left early for San Francisco, where he ran his companies, leaving her at the mercy of staff who watched her with a barely disguised mixture of curiosity and wariness. "The previous mistress never came down before 11, commented Mrs. Jenkins, the housekeeper, in a tone that made it clear she didn't approve of Emily's early rising habits. "The previous mistress?" Emily asked, feeling a chill run down her spine. "Mrs." Jenkins looked away, as if she'd said more than she should have. "I mean Mrs. Elizabeth, Mr. Reynolds' mother. May she rest in peace." But Emily knew how to recognize a lie, however well-intentioned. Throughout the first 6 months, she discovered that her husband, 24 years her senior, carried deep emotional scars that he hid behind his successful businessman facade. The estate was full of forbidden spaces, conversations that stopped when she entered, and gazes that avoided hers when she asked too direct questions. It was on a rainy afternoon when she found the first clue. She had spent the morning exploring the library, a majestic space with shelves reaching to the ceiling and a rolling ladder to reach the highest volumes. Her fingers caressed the worn leather spines when, upon removing a copy of 100 Years of Solitude, a yellowed envelope fell to the floor. The letter was written in a delicate feminine handwriting. The words, in formal, old-fashioned English, spoke of an impossible love, of necessary sacrifices, and of pain that time had failed to mitigate. It was signed simply with an initial, J. Driven by a curiosity she knew was dangerous but irresistible, Emily searched among the other books. To her surprise, she found dozens of similar letters, some so old that the paper crumbled at her touch, others more recent. All spoke of love in its different forms, passionate, forbidden, unrequited, eternal. The estate library revealed its true nature when she discovered that Michael collected hundreds of old love letters, each representing stories of passion that he studied as if they were scientific formulas for understanding love. Her hands trembled as she read the words written by lovers from decades past, realizing that he had spent years trying to decipher the mysteries of the human heart. "It's my personal project," said a voice behind her, startling her. Michael stood in the doorway, watching her with an indecipherable expression. "Love letters through the centuries. I've been collecting them since I was 20. "Why?" Emily asked, her heart racing, fearing she had violated some unwritten code of their marriage. Michael approached slowly, taking one of the oldest letters in his hands. "Because I wanted to understand what makes some people willing to risk everything for love, while others—" He paused, as if he'd reached an invisible boundary in his confession. "I haven't explained myself well. Each letter tells a story, Emily, and stories are the only thing that truly belongs to us in this life." That night, as Michael slept beside her, Emily contemplated his face in the dim light. What secrets did this man harbor? And why did she feel that somehow, understanding those secrets was the key to discovering her own place in this estate, with its solid walls and eloquent silences? The California summer fell upon the estate with a breathtaking intensity. Emily had learned to adapt her routines to the rhythm dictated by the relentless sun, waking at dawn, when the air still retained the coolness of night, and seeking refuge in the thick-walled rooms during the midday hours. It was during one of these early mornings when she truly met Mr. Thompson, the groundskeeper. She had seen him before, of course, a distant figure among the vines or bent over the flower beds in the central courtyard, but they had never exchanged more than polite greetings. That morning, however, she found him in the vegetable garden, his rough hands caressing the leaves of tomato plants with surprising delicacy. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Emily greeted, shielding her eyes from the rising sun with one hand. The elderly man straightened up slowly, with the difficulty of someone who had spent too many hours stooped over the earth. His eyes, faded blue from years of exposure to the elements, studied her with interest. "You rise earlier than the sparrows, ma'am," he replied, with a smile that transformed his weathered face into a map of friendly wrinkles. "Just like the boss when he first came here." "Michael!" Emily couldn't hide her surprise. "When did he arrive here?" Mr. Thompson looked around, as if making sure they were alone, and then gestured for her to sit on a stone bench under a lemon tree. "Mr. Reynolds wasn't born to wealth like many think," he began, with a voice that seemed to emerge directly from the dry earth. "He arrived at the estate when he was 16, skinny as a rail and hunger in his eyes, looking for summer work in the vineyards." The first revelation fell upon Emily like a drop of fresh water on thirsty soil. The estate employees, who had initially treated her with reserved coldness, gradually revealed fragments of Michael's history. "Dr. Harrison, the previous owner, saw something in him," continued Mr. Thompson, absent-mindedly pulling a dry leaf from the lemon tree. "Hired him to work the fields, but soon put him in charge of the accounts. The boy had a head for numbers." "And how did he go from worker to owner of the estate?" Emily asked, absorbed in the story. Mr. Thompson looked at her intently. "That, ma'am, you'll have to ask him. It's not my place to tell that part." In the days that followed, Emily discovered that other employees also held pieces of the puzzle that was Michael's life. Mrs. Barnes, the cook, remembered how the young man saved every penny, giving up even the small luxuries the other workers allowed themselves. "He only spent money on books," she recalled, while kneading the day's bread. "Every month, when he got paid, he'd go to town and come back with a new book under his arm." The others laughed at him, but Mr. Reynolds never seemed to notice. Amy, the youngest of the maids, had heard from her mother that the master had studied at night, after exhausting days in the field, with a candle and pure determination, she said, until he earned a scholarship to Stanford University. The middle-aged chauffeur, a man of few words named Robert, provided the most revealing clue. Mr. Reynolds built his first business with a lone doctor. Harrison gave him, he confided one afternoon while driving her to town, a small wine export company. Nobody bet on him except the old man, and 3 years later, when Dr. Harrison got sick and the estate was going to be sold to pay debts, Mr. Reynolds already had enough money to buy it. The chauffeur glanced at her in the rearview mirror with a special gleam in his eyes. "But the most important thing wasn't that, ma'am. The most important thing was that he kept Dr. Harrison on the estate until the day he died, treating him like his own father. The smell of damp earth and the sound of wind through the redwoods became the soundtrack to Emily's discoveries about her husband's true origins. Each story she heard added depth to the image of this man who, paradoxically, became more enigmatic the more she learned about him. One afternoon, while Michael was reviewing documents in his office, Emily dared to broach the subject. "Mr. Thompson told me you came here very young looking for work." The silence that followed was so dense that Emily feared she had made an irreparable mistake. Finally, Michael put down his pen and looked at her directly. "I was wondering how long it would take you to start asking questions," he said with no trace of anger in his voice. "Yes, I arrived when I was 16, the son of a single mother who had died leaving me alone in the world." His gaze lost itself in some point of the past. "This place saved my life, Emily, and that's why I never stop valuing what I have." His words, loaded with a vulnerability he had never shown her before, fell like stones in the calm pond their marriage had been until then, creating ripples that would forever change its surface. When the calendar marked the beginning of fall, Emily no longer felt like a stranger at the estate. She had learned to move through its spaces with familiarity, to interpret Michael's silences, and to find beauty in the unhurried rhythm of Napa Valley rural life. The vineyard leaves began to transform into golden and crimson hues, announcing the time of harvest. One morning, while exploring the boundaries of the property, Emily encountered an elderly man of venerable appearance who was supervising a group of workers among the rows of vines. "Good morning," she greeted, curious. "May I ask what you're doing exactly?" The man turned toward her. He must have been at least 70, but he stood straight with the dignity of an ancient oak. His face, as wrinkled and expressive as the bark of a century-old redwood, lit up when he recognized her. "Mrs. Reynolds, I'm James Parker, the vineyard foreman. Everyone calls me Mr. Parker." He gestured, encompassing the vineyard. "We're checking if the grapes are ready for harvest. Would you like to learn?" Without waiting for an answer, he handed her a cluster of Cabernet Sauvignon grapes, small and almost black-red. "Try one, but don't swallow it immediately. Let your mouth tell you the story of the grape." Emily followed his instructions, surprised by the explosion of flavors that flooded her senses. Sweetness, acidity, tannins that left a rough but pleasant sensation. "They still need a few days," she said instinctively, surprising herself. Mr. Parker looked at her with renewed interest. "Have you worked in vineyards before, ma'am?" "No, never," she admitted. "But I can feel something's missing. As if the grape hasn't finished telling its story yet." The old man let out a laugh that resonated among the vines. "You have blessed hands, Mrs. Reynolds," he exclaimed, using a typical expression of the region. "A natural gift for understanding the land." During the following weeks, Emily spent each morning in the vineyards, learning from Mr. Parker the secrets of viticulture that didn't appear in any book. Her delicate hands learned to feel the texture of the grapes, to detect the perfect moment for harvest. The foreman, who had supervised the property for 40 years, was impressed with her natural intuition. "You have more sensitivity in your fingertips than many who've spent their whole lives among vines," he told her one day, as they selected clusters for producing a special wine. The discovery of this ability awakened in Emily a confidence she had never suspected she possessed. For the first time in her life, she felt she had found something exclusively her own, not a reflection of others' expectations. One afternoon, while working in the winery with the enologists, Michael appeared unexpectedly. He stood in the doorway, watching her in silence. Emily, so absorbed in her selection task, didn't notice his presence until he spoke. "Mr. Parker says you have a natural talent," he said, with a note of pride that surprised her. "That you would be capable of creating a great wine if you wanted to." Emily blushed, uncomfortable with the praise. "I'm just learning. It's nothing special." "Never underestimate a gift, Emily," he replied, approaching to examine the clusters she had selected. "I spent years working in these vineyards and never had the sensitivity you've shown in weeks." He looked at her with an intensity that made Emily's heart skip a beat. "I want to propose something to you," he continued. "Would you like to create your own wine? You would have total freedom to select the grapes, supervise the process. It would be your personal project." "My project," she repeated, overwhelmed by the proposal. "But I barely know the basics, Michael. What if it's a disaster?" He smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, Emily saw genuine warmth in his gaze. "Then you will have learned more than from 100 successes," he responded simply. "Sometimes, Emily, the most valuable thing isn't the result, but the journey we take to get there." That night, as they dined under the stars in the estate's central courtyard, surrounded by the scent of wisteria and the singing of crickets, Emily felt that something fundamental had changed between them. It wasn't just that Michael had entrusted her with an important project, but that for the first time since their wedding, he truly saw her. And perhaps, she thought as she watched her husband speak passionately about the wines that had made history in the region, she was beginning to see him too. The first major rupture in the apparent calm of their marriage came with December's chill. Michael had announced, with a mixture of resignation and determination, that his family would come to spend the holidays at the estate. "It's been years since I celebrated Christmas with them," he explained, avoiding looking directly at her. "I think it's time to resume some traditions." Emily nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. In the 8 months they had been married, Michael had only mentioned his family in passing. She knew he had 2 younger siblings, both married, but little else. The fact that he had never shown interest in introducing them was a silence that spoke for itself. Preparations for the visit occupied the estate for weeks. Mrs. Jenkins and the rest of the staff moved with nervous energy, cleaning every corner, polishing the family silver, bringing out porcelain sets that had been stored away for years. "Miss Jennifer, the boss's sister, is very demanding," Mrs. Barnes confided to her while preparing an assortment of traditional desserts. "And Mrs. Lisa, Dr. Daniel's wife, always finds something to criticize." The estate, normally a haven of peace, became a hive of activity and anticipated tension. Emily observed the preparations, feeling increasingly like an intruder in her own home, someone who didn't really belong to the family history that would unfold under that centuries-old roof. The second major rupture arrived like a storm in the California winter on Christmas Eve, when Michael's family finally crossed the threshold of the estate. The tension was palpable in the air when his younger siblings and their spouses arrived, bringing with them a coldness that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. Emily received them with a smile that no one returned. Daniel, Michael's middle brother, barely brushed her cheek in a distant greeting. His wife Lisa, an elegant and cold woman, examined her from head to toe with barely disguised disdain. Jennifer, the youngest of the siblings, didn't even bother to feign courtesy. "So this is Michael's new acquisition," she commented, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Younger than the previous ones, no doubt." The words fell like a stone in Emily's stomach. The previous ones? How many had there been? Michael, who was entering at that moment loaded with suitcases, shot his sister a warning look that she deliberately ignored. That night's dinner was an exercise in contained tension. Superficial conversations barely disguised the undercurrents of resentment and malicious curiosity. Emily could feel the evaluative gazes each time she spoke, as if every word was subjected to a relentless judgment. "And how exactly did you and my brother meet?" asked Daniel, breaking an uncomfortable silence. Emily glanced briefly at Michael before responding. "Our parents were business partners," she explained, deliberately omitting the part about her family business going bankrupt and the debts that had led her to accept the marriage. "We met at a company dinner." "How convenient," murmured Jennifer with a sardonic smile. "And so soon afterward, you were already married to one of the richest men in California." Michael hit the table with more force than necessary, making the glasses clink. "Enough, Jennifer," he warned, with a voice so icy that Emily barely recognized it. "I will not allow you to insult my wife in her own home." "Her home?" Jennifer's laughter resonated like breaking crystal. "Please, Michael, we all know this is a temporary arrangement like the previous ones. Only this time you've chosen someone young enough to give you an heir before getting rid of her." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. She stood up abruptly, dropping the embroidered linen napkin on the table. "Excuse me," she murmured, before hurrying out of the dining room. The altered voices of the Reynolds siblings followed her as she crossed the courtyard and took refuge in the garden. The cool California night enveloped her, but she hardly noticed it. Jennifer's words echoed in her mind like a poisoned echo. A temporary arrangement like the previous ones. She didn't know how long she remained there, among the fruit trees that whispered secrets to the wind, until she felt a shawl around her shoulders. Michael was by her side, with an expression of such genuine pain that it momentarily disarmed her anger. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "My family has always had a special talent for cruelty." "How many were there before me, Michael?" she asked directly, tired of secrets and half-truths. He sighed, running a hand through his greying hair. "One marriage," he responded finally. "Just one 15 years ago. It lasted less than 3 years." "And why did it end?" Emily insisted, preparing herself for another painful revelation. Michael looked away toward the redwoods silhouetted like silver shadows under the moonlight. "That, Emily, is a story for another time." His voice sounded tired, defeated. "Tonight we have a decision to make. We can let my family destroy our Christmas, or we can show them they're wrong about us." Emily looked at him, studying every line of his face in the dim light. There was pain there, and secrets, but also a determination that resonated with her own stubbornness. "I won't let them treat me like an intruder," she finally said, standing up straight, "or insinuate that I married you for money." "Then let's go back inside and face them together," he proposed, offering her his arm. And so they did. The tension remained throughout dinner, with Jennifer launching verbal darts that Emily dodged with newly discovered dignity. But when the time came for dessert, the bitter taste of tears mingled with the sweet pecan pie as she struggled to prove her worth to people who had already decided to reject her. That night, in the privacy of their room, Emily made a decision that would change the course of her story. She would not be content to be just another in Michael Reynolds' list of temporary arrangements. She would uncover all the secrets buried in that Napa Valley estate, and when she did, it would be she who decided whether to remain part of that story or write a completely new one. January arrived with intense rains that transformed the vineyard fields into fragmented mirrors, reflecting a grey, heavy sky. Michael's family had departed the day after New Year's, leaving behind a trail of unresolved tensions and unanswered questions. Emily now spent more time in the library, systematically studying the love letters that Michael collected. She had discovered that he organized them chronologically, from missives of the 18th century to more recent correspondence from the 90s. All spoke of love, but none seemed personal to him. They were like specimens in a laboratory, observed with scientific distance. One afternoon, as rain pattered against the windows, she found something different, a small red leather notebook hidden behind a row of first editions of Hemingway. She opened it with trembling hands and discovered it was a diary written in Michael's precise handwriting. April 15th, 1998. Today, I dreamed of her again. 5 years have passed, and her face fades, but her voice remains as clear as the water in the courtyard fountain. Emily closed the notebook abruptly, her heart racing. This was different. It wasn't an impersonal collection of others' feelings, but something intimate and private. She returned the diary to its hiding place, suddenly feeling like an intruder. That night, as they dined in silence, interrupted only by the crackling of the fire in the fireplace, Emily found herself observing Michael with new eyes. Who was the woman with the clear voice? His ex-wife? Someone before? After? "You're very quiet," he commented, serving her more wine. "Is something troubling you?" Emily hesitated, weighing the possibility of asking directly about the diary, but something held her back. Instead, she decided to take a different path. "I was thinking about what your sister said during their visit," she finally answered. "About you looking for someone young to give you an heir." Michael set his glass on the table, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "My sister has a special talent for finding people's weak points," he said bitterly, "but she also has a gift for misinterpreting my motives." "And what are your motives, Michael?" Emily asked, surprised by her own boldness. "Why did you really marry me?" He remained silent for what seemed like an eternity, his eyes fixed on the flames dancing in the fireplace. "Because when I met you, I saw something in you that I had forgotten existed," he finally answered. "An iron will beneath a fragile appearance. You reminded me that true strength has nothing to do with power or money." His words, so unexpected and sincere, left Emily speechless. For the first time since they had met, she felt she was glimpsing the real Michael, not the calculating businessman or the obsessive collector, but the vulnerable man who hid behind those facades. February brought the first signs of the California spring. The fruit trees blossomed, covering the fields with a mantle of intoxicating fragrance. And with the arrival of the new season, Emily began to notice changes in her own body. Unusual fatigue, heightened sensitivity to certain smells, morning sickness she tried to disguise. It was during a visit to town accompanied by Amy when her suspicions were confirmed. The pharmacist, an older woman with kind eyes, discreetly handed her the test she had requested. "Congratulations, ma'am," she said with a warm smile, seeing the second pink line clearly appear on the indicator. "It seems spring has brought new life to the estate." The news fell upon Emily like unexpected rain in the desert. A child, a being growing inside her, half hers, half that enigmatic man with whom she shared a name, but whom she barely really knew. That night, while Michael worked in his office, Emily entered without knocking. He looked up from his documents, surprised by the interruption. "I have something to tell you," she announced, with a voice firmer than she felt. "Has something happened?" he asked, suddenly alert. Emily took a deep breath before responding. "I'm expecting a baby." The silence that followed was absolute. Michael remained completely still, as if time had stopped around him. When he finally got up and came around the desk to approach her, Emily could see something she had never observed in him before: fear. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely audible. She nodded, unable to interpret his reaction. Was he displeased? Surprised? Happy? Then something happened that left her breathless. Michael, the man always in control, always distant, fell to his knees before her. His large, calloused hands, witnesses to years of hard work before wealth, visibly trembled when he placed them on her still flat belly. "A child," he murmured, with a mixture of awe and terror. "I'm going to be a father." And it was during that spring that the third major rupture completely transformed Emily's understanding of her marriage. She discovered that the news of the pregnancy had brought an unexpected vulnerability to the man who had always seemed unbreakable. His hands trembled when they touched her belly, and she realized that he carried a deep fear of not being a good father, having dedicated his entire life to building his fortune instead of human relationships. "I never had a role model," he confessed one night as they contemplated the stars from the terrace. "My father abandoned us when I was 5. I don't know how I'm supposed to do this." "I don't know either," she answered honestly. "But we can learn together." For the first time since they had pronounced their vows, Emily felt they were truly building something together. It wasn't yet love, at least not like the letters Michael treasured described, but it was a beginning. A fragile bridge stretched over the abyss of secrets that still separated them. The most shocking revelation came at the beginning of summer, when Emily was in her 4th month of pregnancy. She had begun to adapt the estate for the baby's arrival, transforming a room near the master bedroom into a future nursery. While checking an old armoire, looking for space to store bedding, she found a carved wooden box hidden behind a pile of blankets. Her first intention was to ignore it, respecting Michael's privacy, but an envelope that stuck out caught her attention. It had a letterhead from a clinic in New York and was dated just 3 months earlier. With her heart racing, Emily removed the envelope and read its contents. It was a medical report written in formal clinical language, but one name stood out clearly: patient Sarah Reynolds. Sarah. Who was Sarah Reynolds? The surname suggested a family relationship, but Michael had never mentioned any Sarah. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and fear, she continued exploring the contents of the box. She found more medical reports, all from the same clinic in New York, dates spanning 15 years. Photographs: a beautiful woman with dark hair and a luminous smile, sometimes alone, sometimes with a younger Michael. And finally, a document that made her blood run cold. A marriage certificate in the names of Michael Reynolds and Sarah Bennett, the first wife. The woman Jennifer had mentioned with such venom during the Christmas visit. Emily dropped the papers, feeling the floor move beneath her feet. Why was Michael still receiving medical reports about his ex-wife? And why did he keep her photographs so carefully? Determined to get answers, she waited for Michael to return from San Francisco. She found him in the office, as every afternoon, reviewing documents with that absolute concentration so characteristic of him. "I need you to explain who Sarah Reynolds is," she said without preamble, placing the box on the desk. Michael looked up, and for an instant, Emily saw genuine fear in his eyes. Then, as if a mask had fallen over his face, his expression became impenetrable. "You've been going through my things," he said with a voice devoid of emotion. "I found the box by accident," she defended herself. "But that doesn't answer my question. Who is she, Michael? And why do you continue receiving reports from a clinic in New York?" He rose slowly, coming around the desk to stand in front of her. For a moment, Emily feared his reaction, but when he spoke, his voice was laden with a sadness so deep it was almost unbearable to hear. "Sarah is my wife," he said simply. "Ex-wife," Emily automatically corrected, feeling a knot in her stomach. Michael shook his head. "No, Emily, she is my wife. We never divorced." The floor seemed to open beneath Emily's feet. The implications of what Michael had just said hit her like an icy wave. "But that would mean that you and I," she began, unable to finish the sentence. "Our marriage isn't legal," he confirmed, his voice barely audible. "It was a ceremony, papers, but without real validity. My lawyers made sure of that." Emily took a step back, as if Michael's words were physically painful. "Why?" was all she could ask, her voice breaking on the simple word. Michael passed a hand over his face, suddenly aged by the weight of revealed secrets. "Sarah suffered an accident 15 years ago," he finally explained. "A severe cerebrovascular accident. She has been in a vegetative state in a specialized clinic in New York since then." He sat heavily on the edge of the desk. "The doctors said she would never wake up, that it was just a matter of time. But I can't abandon her." The most shocking revelation came like a bomb. His first wife hadn't left this world, but remained in a vegetative state in a private clinic in New York. The sound of her own breathing seemed to echo in the deafening silence that followed the confession. The moral and emotional implications of the situation unleashed a storm in Emily's young heart, questioning the legitimacy of her happiness and the love that had begun to bloom between them. "You lied to me?" she asked, with tears freely running down her face. "All this time? The marriage, the estate, the baby?" "I didn't lie about my feelings," he answered, reaching for her hands, which she abruptly withdrew. "What I feel for you is real, Emily. More real than anything I've felt in a very long time." "But I'm not your wife," she insisted, feeling that each word was a stab. "What am I exactly, Michael? Your mistress, your caretaker, the mother of a child who will bear your name but will have no rights to anything. You're the woman who gave me back my life," he said, with an intensity that surprised her. "For 15 years, I've lived in a kind of limbo, trapped between loyalty to a woman who isn't really here anymore and the need to move on. When you met me, you saw a convenient solution," she interrupted him bitterly. "A young, desperate girl whose family was ruined. Someone who could give you an heir without legal complications." Michael vehemently denied it. "No, Emily, when I met you, I saw a possibility for redemption, an opportunity to build something that wasn't based on tragedy and guilt." "Guilt?" she asked, suddenly alert. "Why do you feel guilty, Michael?" He looked away toward the window, where the sun was beginning to set behind the redwoods, tinting the sky an intense orange that seemed almost unreal. "Sarah's accident," he began with a trembling voice. "We were arguing, she was driving. I had just confessed that I wanted a divorce." The puzzle pieces began to fit in Emily's mind. The obsessive collecting of love letters, the unhealthy devotion to a wife in a coma, the illegal marriage with her. It was all part of an elaborate penitence system that Michael had built to punish himself for something he considered his fault. "You can't keep living like this," she finally said with a clarity that arose from shock. "You can't build a life on lies and guilt, Michael." He looked at her with moist eyes, something she had never seen in this always controlled man. "What do you propose then?" he asked with a vulnerability that momentarily disarmed her. "I need time," she answered, instinctively protecting her belly with her hands. "Time to think about what all this means for us. For the baby." That night, Emily locked herself in the room they had shared for almost a year, but which now felt like a stage where she had played a role without knowing it. The solid walls that had once welcomed her now seemed silent witnesses to an elaborate farce. As the moon illuminated the vineyards with its silver light, Emily made a decision. She would not leave the estate, not yet. But neither would she continue living in the lie. She would demand truth, transparency, and above all, a clear future for the child growing inside her. A future that, perhaps, could include Michael, but only if he was willing to face his demons once and for all. The days following the revelation passed in a state of contained tension. Emily moved to one of the guest rooms, establishing a physical distance that reflected the emotional abyss that had opened between them. Michael respected her decision without protest, as if he understood that he had lost the right to any complaint. The estate, which for months had begun to feel like a home, once again became an alien space. The staff, sensing the tension between the master and mistress, moved like silent shadows, avoiding crossing their path. Emily spent hours in the oldest vineyard on the property, sitting under a century-old vine whose twisted trunk had witnessed generations of joys and tragedies. There, caressing her belly that was beginning to show the first visible signs of pregnancy, she tried to order her thoughts and emotions. One afternoon, as she watched the hypnotic dance of the vine leaves under the wind, she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't need to turn to know it was Mr. Thompson, the old groundskeeper. "Mr. Reynolds is leaving for New York tomorrow," said the elderly man without preamble. "He asked me to prepare the car to take him to the San Francisco airport." Emily felt a pang of alarm. "Did he say when he would return?" Mr. Thompson shook his head. "No, ma'am, but he ordered that luggage be prepared for at least 2 weeks. The news left her with contradictory feelings. On one hand, the physical distance might help her think more clearly. On the other, the idea that Michael had decided to leave without saying goodbye hurt more than she was willing to admit. That night, as she dined alone in the main dining room under the watchful gaze of the family portraits that adorned the walls, she heard the door open. Michael entered, looking tired, and with an expression of determination she had learned to recognize. "Mr. Thompson told me you're leaving tomorrow," she said before he could speak. Michael nodded, keeping a prudent distance. "I'm going to see Sarah," he confirmed. "And her doctors." "For what purpose?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. He approached slowly, as if fearing she might flee if he made too sudden a movement. "To make a decision I've postponed for too long," he answered, with a gravity that made her shudder. "Sarah has been without showing signs of consciousness for 15 years. The doctors have always said there's no real hope of recovery, but I've refused to accept it." He sat across from her, his eyes fixed on Emily's. "I've maintained this limbo out of cowardice," he continued, "unable to let her go, unable to truly move forward. And in the process I've dragged you into an impossible situation." "What are you going to do?" Emily asked with a lump in her throat. "Talk to her doctors about the possibility of withdrawing life support," he said, his voice barely audible. "But first I want you to know the whole truth about Sarah, about me, about everything." During the next 2 hours, Michael opened the floodgates of a past he had carefully sealed away. He told her how he had met Sarah when they were both in college, she studying fine arts, he business administration, how they had married young and full of dreams, convinced that love would be enough to overcome any obstacle. He told her about the difficult years when he worked day and night to build his company, while Sarah felt increasingly alone and resentful, about the arguments that became increasingly bitter, the recriminations, the reproaches, about how gradually love had transformed into a routine empty of meaning. "On the day of the accident," he said, his voice broken with emotion, "I had told her I wanted a divorce, that I had met someone else." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. "There was another woman?" Michael nodded with a tormented expression. "Kate, a business partner. I believed I was in love with her, but in retrospect I was just escaping from a marriage that had become a prison for both of us." He paused, passing a trembling hand over his face. Sarah was furious, devastated. She insisted on driving back to San Francisco herself. "I should have refused. I should have seen that she wasn't in any condition." His voice faded, unable to continue. Emily remained silent, processing the magnitude of the guilt that Michael had carried for 15 years. Finally, when he seemed to regain some composure, she dared to ask, "What happened to Kate?" A bitter smile crossed Michael's face. "She disappeared as soon as Sarah had the accident. She couldn't handle the situation," she said. "I don't blame her." Emily felt a wave of compassion for this man who had built his life around a tragedy, unable to forgive himself. "And how do I fit into all this?" she finally asked softly. "Why me, Michael?" He looked at her with an intensity that made her shiver. "Because when I met you, I felt something I believed was lost forever. Hope." He extended a hand across the table without quite touching her. "I didn't choose you out of convenience, Emily. I chose you because, despite all your difficult circumstances, I saw in you a strength and authenticity that reminded me what it means to be truly alive." Emily felt tears roll down her cheeks, unable to contain them. The months of doubts, of unanswered questions, of half-truths seemed to crystallize in this moment of raw honesty. "I need you to understand something," Michael continued. "I don't expect you to forgive me for lying. I don't expect you to want to stay by my side when I return, but our child will have everything I can give, I swear. And so will you, regardless of what you decide." Before Emily could respond, he stood up, visibly exhausted by the confession. "My flight leaves early," he said. "I should go rest, but I wanted you to know the whole truth before I left." He headed for the door, but stopped before exiting. "One last thing," he added, without turning. "The letters I collect, I started doing it after the accident. I wanted to understand what makes love survive or be destroyed. I wanted to find answers in others' words, since mine had failed so catastrophically." And with those words, he left the dining room, leaving Emily alone with the weight of a truth that was, simultaneously, more terrible and more human than she had imagined. Michael left at dawn, without saying goodbye. Emily saw him from the window of her room, a solitary figure crossing the central courtyard with heavy steps, as if carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. The car started with a soft purr, and soon the sound of the engine was lost among the vineyards, leaving behind a silence that seemed to amplify every thought. The following days passed in a strange calm. Without Michael's presence, the estate acquired a different rhythm. Emily found herself adopting new routines, reclaiming spaces she had previously avoided, because they felt too connected to him. The library, in particular, became her refuge. She no longer explored the love letters with the furtive urgency of someone seeking secrets, but with the calm curiosity of someone trying to understand a complex mind. She grouped them by era, by types of relationships, by emotional intensity. In this process, she began to glimpse patterns in Michael's collection. All the letters, without exception, spoke of a love that had survived some kind of test. A week after Michael's departure, Emily received an unexpected call. Jennifer Reynolds, Michael's younger sister, wanted to see her. "It's important," the woman insisted, with a voice that had lost the cutting edge Emily remembered. "Please." They agreed to meet at a cafe in town, neutral ground that would allow Emily to maintain a certain emotional distance. When she arrived, Jennifer was already there, alone at a table in the back, looking tired and considerably less intimidating than during the Christmas visit. "Thank you for coming," she said, as Emily sat across from her. "I know I'm probably the last person you wanted to see." "Why are you here, Jennifer?" Emily asked directly, instinctively protecting her belly, now visibly rounded under her dress. The woman took a sip of her coffee before responding. "Michael called me from New York," she explained finally. "He told me that he's told you the truth about Sarah, about the accident, about everything." Emily nodded, tense. "He also told me he's considering withdrawing life support," Jennifer continued, her voice breaking. "After 15 years, he's finally willing to let her go." "And that bothers you?" Emily asked, genuinely confused. During the Christmas visit, Jennifer had shown obvious resentment toward her brother's situation. "On the contrary," the woman replied with a sad smile, "it's what Sarah would have wanted, what we've all wanted for her for years." Her eyes filled with tears. "Michael has clung to an impossible hope for too long, punishing himself, refusing to live fully." "Why are you telling me this?" Emily asked, feeling a strange mixture of compassion and wariness. Jennifer looked at her directly, with an intensity that reminded her of her brother. "Because I owe you an apology, Emily." Her voice sounded sincere, stripped of its previous arrogance. "I judged you without knowing you, assuming the worst. I believed you were just another temporary distraction, like there were others after the accident." "Others?" Emily couldn't help asking. "Two," Jennifer clarified. "Superficial relationships that lasted just a few months. He never married any of them, not even in that kind of symbolic ceremony he organized with you." She paused as if weighing her next words. "You're the first he's brought to the estate, the first he's presented as his wife, even though legally she can't be. And certainly the first who's going to give him a child." Emily felt a lump in her throat. "And that changes your opinion of me." "What changes my opinion is seeing how he looks at you," Jennifer replied simply, "and knowing that, for the first time in 15 years, he's making difficult decisions instead of hiding in guilt and penance." They remained silent for a moment as the waitress served them more coffee. Finally, Jennifer continued, "There's something else you should know, something Michael probably hasn't told you because he can barely admit it to himself." She lowered her voice, leaning forward. Sarah and he were already separated when the accident occurred, not legally but in practice. They had been living separate lives for months. "He told me he had asked for a divorce that same day," Emily responded, confused. "That was the culmination, not the beginning," Jennifer clarified. "Their marriage had ended long before. Both were unhappy, both had moved on in a certain sense." She made a significant pause, including Sarah. The implications of what Jennifer was saying fell upon Emily like a revelation. "Sarah had also met someone else?" Jennifer nodded. "An art professor, a colleague of hers at the university. Michael knows, he always knew. But somehow, that only fed his guilt. As if he had been the only one responsible for the failure of their marriage, as if Sarah hadn't also had her own decisions and responsibilities." After that conversation, Emily returned to the estate with her mind in turmoil. The image of Michael that she had built over months was transforming once again, acquiring new dimensions. He wasn't just a man tormented by guilt, but someone who had chosen to carry the entire responsibility for a shared tragedy. The days turned into weeks. Michael called every night from New York, brief conversations charged with contained emotion. He told her about Sarah's condition, his conversations with the doctors, decisions that were postponed again and again. He never directly asked about Emily's feelings toward him, as if he feared the answer. One night, as the California summer unfolded its symphony of cicadas and stars, Emily had a vivid dream. In it, she walked through the oldest vineyard on the estate, where the century-old vines formed fantastic figures under the moonlight. Among the vines appeared a woman with dark hair and a luminous smile. Sarah. She was holding out something that Emily couldn't see clearly. "Take care of him," the woman in the dream said, "and don't let him keep running from life." Emily awoke with tears in her eyes and a clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. She understood that the real obstacle wasn't Sarah, nor the past, not even the lies. It was fear. Michael's fear of loving completely again, of risking another failure. And, she realized with sudden honesty, her own fear of giving herself to a man whose heart seemed divided between the present and a past he couldn't change. That morning she wrote a long letter, not to Michael, but to herself. In it, she tried to unravel her own feelings, separating the pain of betrayal from what she truly felt for the complex and wounded man with whom she had shared almost a year of her life. When she finished, she had one certainty. Beyond the lies and secrets, she had learned to love Michael Reynolds with all his contradictions and scars. The challenge now was to determine if that love was enough to build a future together, or if the shadows of the past were too dense to allow light to filter between them. The August heat weighed on the estate like a suffocating blanket. Emily, now in her 6th month of pregnancy, had adapted her routines to avoid the hottest hours of the day. She spent mornings in the wine cellar, where the temperature remained constant thanks to the thick stone walls, and afternoons in the library, surrounded by books and the love letters she now knew almost by heart. It was during one of those afternoons when Mrs. Jenkins, the housekeeper, gently knocked on the door. "Ma'am, mail has arrived for you," she announced, extending an official-looking envelope. Emily took it with curiosity. She didn't usually receive personal correspondence at the estate, and the sender, a law firm in Boston, was completely unknown to her. Inside, she found a formal letter that she had to read twice to assimilate its content. Mrs. Eleanor Harrison, a great-aunt of Emily whom she barely remembered having seen a couple of times in her childhood, had recently passed away in London, England. The elderly woman, who had emigrated decades ago and made a fortune in real estate, had left Emily as the sole heir to her considerable estate. The fourth revelation came through this unexpected letter, revealing that she had received a generous inheritance from a distant aunt who had moved to England. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. She, who had been accused of being a fortune hunter, now discovered she possessed substantial resources of her own. "Are you sure there isn't some mistake?" Emily asked the lawyer when she called him on the phone. "Completely sure, Mrs. Reynolds," the man responded. "Mrs. Harrison was very specific in her will. Apparently you reminded her of herself in her youth. A woman of character," were her exact words. The news left her in a state of shock. Overnight, she had gone from being economically dependent on Michael to possessing her own fortune that, according to the lawyer's preliminary estimates, amounted to several $1,000,000. That night, when Michael called from New York as usual, Emily told him about the inheritance. "It's extraordinary," he said after a long silence. "How do you feel?" "Overwhelmed," she answered honestly. "And strangely liberated." "Liberated?" Michael's tone revealed a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Yes," Emily confirmed. "Now I have options, Michael. I can choose to stay or leave, for the right reasons." The silence on the other end of the line was so prolonged that Emily feared the connection had been cut. "What would those reasons be?" he finally asked, with a cautious voice. Emily took a deep breath before responding. "If I stay, it will be because I want to build a life with you despite everything that's happened. Not out of necessity, not for the baby, not for comfort, just for—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "For love." It was the first time either of them had pronounced that word in relation to what they felt for each other. It floated between them like a fragile promise, a bridge stretched over turbulent waters. "Emily," Michael began, but she interrupted him. "You don't need to answer now," she said quickly. "In fact, I prefer you don't. We both need time to think about what we truly want." Financial independence brought a new dynamic to their relationship, allowing both of them to choose to be together out of pure love, not necessity or convenience. This new freedom, however, brought with it new questions. What would Emily do with her newly acquired fortune? How would this fit into the life they had begun to build together at the estate? In the weeks that followed, while Michael remained in New York facing his own demons at Sarah's bedside, Emily began to formulate a plan. She consulted with the lawyer about the possibility of creating a foundation dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs in rural areas of California. The idea had emerged from her own observations in the town near the estate, where many women with talent and determination lacked the resources and guidance necessary to develop their own businesses. "It's an excellent initiative, ma'am," Mr. Parker, the vineyard foreman, approved when Emily shared her ideas. "The women of this land have always been its true strength, though few recognize it." Planning the foundation gave Emily a purpose that went beyond waiting and uncertainty. Each day, as her belly grew and the life inside her became more present with movements and kicks, she felt that she too was growing toward a more complete version of herself. It was at the end of August when she received the call that would change everything once more. The number on the screen wasn't Michael's, but an unknown one with a New York area code. "Mrs. Reynolds?" asked a male voice. "This is Dr. Miller, from the clinic where Mrs. Sarah Reynolds is admitted." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Has something happened?" she asked, fearing the worst. "Actually, yes," the doctor replied in a cautious tone. "There has been an unexpected development. Mrs. Sarah has shown signs of increased brain activity in recent days, and this morning she opened her eyes and recognized her nurse." The phone almost slipped from Emily's trembling hands as the doctor explained the situation. The most devastating moment had arrived in midsummer. The first wife had awakened from her coma after 15 years. The nights became endless, filled with whispered conversations under the California stars, trying to navigate an emotional territory for which there were no maps. Sarah's awakening raised questions for which there were no simple answers. What did this mean for Michael, who had spent 15 years divided between guilt and hope? And what did it mean for Emily and the baby she was expecting? Could a man truly belong to two women, one to whom he was legally bound by a tragic past, and another with whom he had built the promise of a future? The ethical and emotional dilemma now testing every fiber of Emily's inner strength. As she caressed her protruding belly, she felt the baby moving energetically, as if sensing her agitation. "Everything will be all right," she whispered, both to the baby and to herself. "Somehow we'll find a way through this." But in the solitude of the night, looking at the stars from the terrace where she had so often contemplated the sky with Michael, Emily wondered if there really existed a path that wouldn't lead to more pain. September arrived with unexpected gentleness, bringing fresher air and skies of an impossible blue over the Napa Valley fields. Emily, now in her 7th month of pregnancy, felt that time acquired an elastic quality, sometimes stretching endlessly during sleepless nights, and other times compressing into moments of frantic activity. Michael had remained in New York after Sarah's surprising awakening. His calls, once predictable and structured, had become irregular and charged with an emotion that Emily could barely decipher. He told her of small progress, Sarah recognizing objects, responding to simple questions, even smiling occasionally. But there was something Michael didn't mention, a crucial detail that Emily discovered only when she dared to ask directly. Does she recognize you, Michael? Does she remember who you are? The silence on the other end of the line was revealing. No, he finally admitted. She doesn't recognize me or remember anything of our life together. The doctors say it's possible she may never recover those memories. The damage to those specific areas of the brain is permanent. The news provoked contradictory feelings in Emily. On one hand, relief. On the other, a deep compassion for this woman who had awakened to an unrecognizable world where 15 years had vanished like a dream at dawn. "What do you feel when you're with her?" she asked, knowing the answer could break her heart. "Gratitude," he responded after a long pause, "and a strange sense of farewell. It's as if I'm meeting a completely new person who, paradoxically, was someone crucial in my life." It was through that call that Emily discovered something unexpected. The first wife, although conscious, had no memories of the years she had spent married to Michael. To her, he was a kind stranger who visited her daily. Sarah's decision to remain in New York, building a new life with the caregivers who had become her family during her long absence, freed both of them to embrace their future without guilt. "She has a special connection with her primary nurse, Jessica," Michael explained. "They've been together for 10 years. Jessica read her books, played her music, talked to her as if she could hear. And somehow Sarah seems to remember her, to feel safe with her." A month after Sarah's awakening, Michael finally returned to the estate. Emily waited for him in the central courtyard, under the shade of the oldest oak tree. When she saw him cross the main door, she immediately noticed the change. Michael walked with a lightness she had never seen in him before, as if he had left behind an invisible weight he had carried for years. He stopped a few yards from her, studying her with a gaze that combined admiration and fear. "You're beautiful," he said simply. Emily instinctively brought her hands to her belly. "We're fine," she answered, including the baby in her affirmation. "How are you?" Michael took a step toward her, still maintaining a certain distance. "Free," he said with a voice laden with emotion. "For the first time in 15 years, I feel truly free, Emily." That night, seated on the terrace under a starry sky that seemed to extend to infinity, Michael told her everything about the weeks in New York. He spoke of the medical miracle that Sarah's awakening represented, of the intensive therapies she was receiving, of how the doctors were amazed by her capacity to relearn basic skills. "The lawyers are preparing the divorce papers," he explained. "It's a complex process given the circumstances, but Sarah has given her consent. He paused, searching for the right words. "She wants us to move forward with our lives." "Did you tell her about me?" Emily asked, her heart racing. "Yes," he confirmed. "I showed her your photograph, told her about the baby." A soft smile illuminated his face. "She said you have kind eyes." Emily felt tears gathering in her eyes. Somehow the benevolent judgment of this woman who had been between life and death for so long seemed more significant than any other approval. "And now what?" she asked, discreetly wiping away a tear. Michael extended his hand across the table, offering it to her. After a moment of hesitation, Emily entwined her fingers with his. "Now, if you want, we start again," he answered. Not as Michael and Emily of the arranged marriage, but as two people who have passed through fire and emerged transformed. Two people who choose each other freely, with open eyes and sincere hearts. The proposal floated between them like a promise, fragile but full of possibilities. Emily knew the road wouldn't be easy, that both their scars would need time to heal completely. But as she felt the warmth of Michael's hand in hers, and the baby moving inside her, as if affirming its presence in this new family configuration, she knew she was willing to try. "I would like that," she finally said, "to start again." During the following weeks, the estate witnessed a slow rebirth. Emily and Michael learned to recognize each other anew, discovering aspects of the other that had remained hidden beneath layers of secrets and half-truths. They shared the love letters from the collection, reading them aloud and discussing what made some connections survive the worst storms, while others vanished at the slightest breeze. The foundation that Emily had begun to plan took concrete shape, with Michael contributing his business experience and contacts. Together they visited nearby towns, listening to stories of women with postponed dreams and unexplored talents. "I've never seen you like this," Michael commented one afternoon, after a particularly productive meeting with a group of local artisans. "So passionate, so sure of yourself. I've never had the opportunity to discover what I'm capable of," she responded simply. "I've always been someone's daughter, someone's fiancée, someone's wife. Now I'm simply Emily, and I'm discovering what that means." As her pregnancy advanced, Emily felt an increasingly deep connection, not only with the baby growing inside her, but also with the land that sheltered them. The estate, with its century-old vines and its redwoods that had witnessed generations of joys and sorrows, no longer seemed like a borrowed stage but a true home. One October morning, as they walked together through the oldest vineyard, Michael stopped in front of a particularly impressive vine, whose twisted trunk told stories of centuries of resistance. "You know, my grandfather used to say that vines are like people," he commented, caressing the rough bark. "The most twisted ones, those that have been shaped by winds and storms, are the ones that produce the sweetest wine." Emily smiled, recognizing the metaphor in their own lives. "Do you believe that's true for us too?" she asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "That after everything we've been through, we can create something beautiful together?" Michael embraced her gently, respecting her swollen belly. "I don't believe it," he answered with a smile. "I know it." November unfolded its symphony of colors over the estate vineyards, transforming the leaves into a kaleidoscope of golds, coppers, and purples. The harvest season had ended weeks ago, but the sweet aroma of pressed grapes still floated in the air, mingling with the promise of the first winter fires. Emily, now in the 8th month of her pregnancy, observed the seasonal changes with a sense of deep connection. Her body, like the earth itself, was preparing to bear fruit, to bring new life amid the imminent winter. One morning, while supervising the cleaning of the barrels in the winery, she received an unexpected visit. Robert, the chauffeur, entered with a worried expression. "Mrs. Reynolds' visitors have arrived," he announced. "Mr. Gregory Harrison and his lawyer. They say they have an urgent matter to discuss with you and Mr. Reynolds." The name struck Emily like an electric current. Gregory Harrison was the son of the estate's former owner, the man who had welcomed Michael in his youth and given him his first opportunity. "Michael is in San Francisco," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Did they mention what it's about?" Robert shook his head. "No, ma'am, but they seem tense." Emily received them in the main room, where portraits of generations of previous owners seemed to observe the scene with interest. Gregory Harrison turned out to be a middle-aged man, with prematurely white hair and steel-blue eyes that reminded her of his father. His lawyer, a thin man with a nervous appearance, carried a worn leather briefcase. "Mrs. Reynolds," Harrison greeted with formality. "I apologize for presenting myself like this, without warning." "Don't worry," Emily replied, indicating that they should take a seat. "How can I help you?" Harrison exchanged a look with his lawyer before continuing. "It's about the estate," he finally explained. "It has come to my attention that there's a clause in the sales contract my father signed with Michael that could invalidate the transaction." The news fell like a stone in Emily's stomach. "Invalidate? After so many years?" The lawyer coughed discreetly. "Mr. Harrison has just discovered documents in his late mother's house," he explained, taking out some papers from his briefcase. "Apparently, Doctor, Harrison included a clause that established that the property should return to the Harrison family if Michael did not have descendants within 20 years following the purchase." "An eccentric clause, I admit," Harrison intervened. "My father was like that, full of romantic ideas about the land and family continuity, but legally binding according to my lawyer." Emily felt the room spin around her. The idea of losing the estate, especially now that she had come to feel it as a true home, was devastating. "As you can see," Harrison continued, pointing to her belly, "that clause won't be a problem for much longer. The baby you're expecting will be born in less than a month." Harrison smiled with a coldness that reminded Emily of Jennifer during her first visit. "The problem, Ma'am, is that you aren't legally married to Michael Reynolds. Therefore, your child wouldn't be considered his legitimate descendant according to the specific terms of the contract." The blow was so unexpected that Emily had to hold onto the arm of the chair to maintain her balance. How did this man know about the legal situation of her marriage? And why did he appear now, when Michael was finally about to obtain his divorce? "I see I've surprised you," Harrison commented. "I thought Michael would have told you about me." "He's never mentioned you," Emily admitted. A bitter smile crossed the man's face. "I'm not surprised. Our history isn't exactly a pleasant topic for him." He leaned forward. "You see, ma'am, Michael and I grew up together. He as my father's protégé, I as the legitimate heir. My father always favored him, always saw in him qualities that he apparently didn't find in his own son." The resentment in his voice was so palpable that Emily could almost feel its weight in the air. "When my father died and the estate was going to be sold to pay debts, I was in Europe, building my own life. Michael took advantage of my absence to convince my mother, already elderly and confused, to sell him the property." "That isn't true." Michael's voice, cold and cutting like steel, resonated from the doorway. Everyone turned, surprised by his silent arrival. "Your mother wasn't confused, Gregory," he continued, advancing toward the group with measured steps. "She knew exactly what she was doing. And she did it because you had completely abandoned her and her financial problems." Harrison stood up, confronting Michael with clenched fists. "My father treated you like a son, and you repaid him by stealing his legacy." "Your father taught me the value of hard work and integrity," Michael responded without raising his voice. "And he asked me on his deathbed to take care of your mother and the estate because he knew you wouldn't do it." The tension between the two men was so dense that Emily feared they might come to blows. But then Michael did something unexpected. He smiled and addressed the lawyer. "Mr. Baker, may I see those documents, please?" The lawyer, visibly uncomfortable, handed him the papers. Michael examined them briefly before returning them. "They're quite good forgeries, I admit," he said calmly. "But forgeries nonetheless. Dr. Harrison's signature doesn't match that of the original documents, which I happen to have in my safe in San Francisco." He looked directly at Harrison. "Did you really think this would work, Gregory, after all these years?" Harrison's face transformed into a mask of fury. "You got away with it then. But you won't always," he spat, abruptly collecting the documents from his lawyer's hands. "This doesn't end here." "On that you're right," Michael agreed. "It doesn't end here. It ends in court, where I'll file charges for attempted fraud if you come near my family or my property again." After the visitor's departure, Michael collapsed into an armchair, visibly exhausted by the confrontation. "I'm sorry," he said, rubbing his eyes. "I didn't want you to have to deal with ghosts from my past." Emily sat beside him, taking his hands in hers. "We're a team now, remember? Your ghosts are mine too." Michael looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. "How is it possible that after everything that's happened, after all my lies and mistakes, you're still here by my side?" Emily reflected for a moment before responding. "Because we all make mistakes, Michael. The difference lies in how we choose to learn from them." She brought one of his hands to her belly, where the baby was moving energetically. "And because I believe we deserve the opportunity to build something good and true, not just for us, but for this little one who's on the way." Michael knelt before her, gently resting his head against her belly. The baby, as if sensing his presence, kicked precisely at that point. "Seems like someone agrees with you," he joked with moist eyes. That night, under a clear sky sown with stars, Michael told Emily the true story of how he had acquired the estate. He told her about Dr. Harrison, a just but severe man who had seen potential in the hungry and determined young man who had arrived looking for work. How he had taught him not just about agriculture and business, but about integrity and responsibility. The estate was mortgaged when he died, Michael explained. His wife couldn't keep up with the payments, and Gregory refused to return from Europe to help her. I had just sold my first company at a profit, so I offered to buy the property and allow Mrs. Harrison to continue living here until her death. "And did she?" Emily asked, fascinated by this new piece of the puzzle. Michael nodded with a nostalgic smile. "She lived here for another 10 years. She taught me everything about the estate's history, about each vine, each corner." His gaze lost itself in memories. "When Sarah and I married, she became a kind of adopted grandmother to us. She was happy despite everything." Emily felt something click in her understanding of Michael, his dedication to the estate, his sense of responsibility toward the land and the people who depended on it, All was rooted in that formative relationship with Dr. Harrison and his wife. There was never any clause about descendants, Michael confirmed. It's just another attempt by Gregory to claim something he never bothered to value when he could have kept it. Do you think he'll try again? Emily asked, concerned. Michael shook his head. No. He knows he has no legal basis. This was more an attempt at intimidation than a real threat. As they contemplated together the moon rising over the vineyards, Emily felt a deep gratitude for these newly shared truths. Each story revealed, each secret exposed, was one more step toward building a relationship based on honesty and mutual trust. And perhaps, she thought as she felt the baby move inside her, that was the true harvest, gathering the fruits of a love that had slowly matured through storms and droughts until reaching its full sweetness. December arrived with unusual cold for Napa Valley. The mornings dawned covered by a thin layer of frost that transformed the fields into fairy tale landscapes, brilliant under the winter sun. Emily, now in the last weeks of her pregnancy, contemplated these changes from the glass-enclosed terrace that Michael had specially prepared for her, a warm refuge from where she could observe nature without exposing herself to the cold that the doctor had advised her to avoid. The estate buzzed with activity. The probable birth date was approaching, and Michael had insisted that everything be perfectly prepared. The baby's room, decorated in soft, natural tones, was ready with furniture made by local craftsmen. Mrs. Barnes, the cook, prepared special dishes designed to strengthen the expectant mother, while Mrs. Jenkins supervised the preparation of the layette with the meticulousness of someone who had seen generations of children born on the property. One morning, as Emily organized the tiny onesies and blankets in the nursery closet, Michael entered with an expression she had learned to recognize. He had something important to share. "I have news from New York," he announced, sitting beside her on the small sofa. "The divorce papers are ready, they just need my signature." Emily felt a lump in her throat. Despite all they had advanced in their relationship, despite the trust and love they had built, the shadow of Michael's past had never completely disappeared. "Are you going to sign them?" she asked, although she already knew the answer. Michael took her hands in his. "Tomorrow itself," he confirmed. "I want our child to be born into a family without shadows, without lies." "How is Sarah?" Emily asked, with genuine interest. Over the months she had developed a strange connection with this woman she had never met, but whose story was so deeply intertwined with her own. "Surprisingly well," Michael answered with a smile. "She's recovered her speech almost completely and is learning to walk again." He paused as if deciding whether to share something more. "And she's in love." The revelation surprised Emily. "In love?" Michael nodded, with an expression of serene acceptance. "With her primary therapist, David, a kind man who has worked with her from the beginning." His eyes reflected a mixture of emotions. "It's strange, you know. I should feel jealousy or pain, but the only thing I feel is relief and happiness for her." Emily understood then that Michael had finally completed his healing process. The guilt he had carried for 15 years, the sense of responsibility that had kept him tied to a tragic past, had transformed into a mature acceptance that allowed him to sincerely wish for Sarah's happiness, even if that happiness no longer included him. "She asked me to tell you something," Michael continued. "She said, tell her to take care of you as you've taken care of me all these years, and not to let you keep punishing yourself for the past." The words, so similar to those Emily had heard in her dream months ago, gave her chills. It was as if, somehow, Sarah and she had established a communication that transcended time and distance. The following days passed in an atmosphere of calm expectation. Michael traveled briefly to San Francisco to sign the divorce documents and complete the legal preparations that would finally allow his marriage to Emily to be officialized. Upon his return, he brought with him a small blue velvet box. "It's not an engagement ring," he clarified, seeing Emily's surprised expression. "We've already passed that stage, albeit in a rather unconventional manner." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold chain with a pendant in the shape of a vine. "It's a promise of roots, of permanence, of life that renews itself despite the storms." Emily felt tears gather in her eyes as Michael placed the chain around her neck. The small vine, crafted with exquisite detail, rested right above her heart. "It's perfect," she whispered, touching the pendant with reverence. On the night of the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, Emily felt the first contractions. They began gently, like a distant reminder, but intensified with a regularity that left no room for doubt. The baby had decided it was time to meet the world. Michael, who had meticulously planned every detail of the transfer to the San Francisco hospital, suddenly found himself completely disoriented by the speed with which the birth was progressing. "We won't make it to San Francisco," Mrs. Jenkins declared after examining Emily. "This child is in a hurry to be born." "But the doctor, the hospital," Michael stammered, with an expression of panic that Emily, despite the pain, found almost comical. "Women have given birth in this estate for generations," Mrs. Jenkins reassured him, "and Amy was an obstetric nurse before working here. We'll be fine." And so in the master bedroom of the estate, the same where everything had begun with that whisper that had changed her life, Emily gave birth to a boy with powerful lungs and tiny fists that waved in the air as if wanting to embrace the entire world at once. "William," Emily said when Michael placed the newborn in her arms, "like the man who gave you your first opportunity." Michael, with tears flowing freely down his face, nodded without being able to speak. At that moment, surrounded by the estate staff who had become their extended family, under the same roof that had witnessed centuries of lives intertwined with the land, both felt they were completing a circle. The boy resting between them wasn't just the culmination of their love, but also a new beginning, the promise of stories yet to be written. The final revelation came during the dawn after the birth. While Emily slept, exhausted by the effort of labor, Michael received an unexpected call from Dr. Wilson, the patriarch of one of the oldest families in the region and a close friend of the late Dr. Harrison. "Michael, son," said the elderly man with an emotional voice, "I just heard about the birth of your son. I couldn't wait until tomorrow to tell you." "Tell me what, Dr. Wilson?" Michael asked, intrigued. "That the time has come to give you what Harrison entrusted to me before he died, a letter for you, with specific instructions that I should give it to you the day you had a son." The next morning, as the first rays of winter sun illuminated the vineyard, Dr. Wilson arrived at the estate. He was a man of almost 90, but he remained upright and lucid. In his trembling hands, he carried a yellowed envelope, aged by years. "I've kept it all this time as I promised," he said, handing it to Michael. Harrison knew this day would come, though I, frankly, was beginning to doubt. Michael and Emily, with little William sleeping in her arms, read the letter together. In it, the old Harrison expressed his pride in the man Michael had become, and his conviction that someday he would form his own family. But the most surprising was the last part. "Along with this letter, Wilson will give you the documents that officially recognize you as my adopted son, and therefore the legitimate heir to the estate and all its lands. My wife knows and approves of this decision, though we have agreed to keep it secret until this moment, to avoid unnecessary conflicts with my biological son. The estate isn't just land and stones, Michael. It's history, its continuity, its responsibility toward those who depend on it to live. I entrust it to you because I know you understand this, as Gregory never did." The final revelation came during the harvest of the second year. They discovered that, through posthumous adoption, the estate and vineyards legitimately belonged to Michael. The document revealed that Dr. Harrison had chosen to leave it to him, recognizing him as his true spiritual heir. The legacy wasn't just material, but represented complete acceptance in a culture that had initially rejected him for his humble origins. Emily watched Michael as he assimilated this last truth. His eyes shone with unshed tears as he held the letter in trembling hands. "After all," she said softly, "it was always yours." "Ours," he corrected, looking at the baby who slept peacefully, oblivious to the profound meaning of what had just been revealed. "And someday William's." As the sun ascended in the sky, bathing the estate in its golden light, Emily understood that they had reached the climax of their shared story. Lies had been replaced by truths, secrets by transparency, fear by trust. The path hadn't been easy or direct, but each detour, each obstacle, had led them precisely to where they needed to be. That afternoon, when little William awoke hungry and demanding, Michael held him while Emily prepared to feed him. Observing them together, mother and son, he felt a fullness he had never believed possible. "Are you ready?" he whispered, repeating those words he had pronounced the first night at the estate, but which now contained a completely new meaning. Emily smiled, recognizing the question for what it really was, not just a reference to the immediate task of nursing their son, but an invitation to the life they had ahead, with all its challenges and joys. "Yes," she answered, taking the baby in her arms. "We're ready." Spring 2 years later. The estate shone under the California sun, decked out for the occasion. Garlands of wildflowers and vine branches decorated the courtyards, while long tables covered with white linen tablecloths awaited guests under the shade of the oak trees. The scent of wisteria permeated the air, mingling with the aromas of aromatic herbs and freshly baked bread emanating from the kitchens. Emily was in the library, that space that had once harbored Michael's deepest secrets, and now was their shared sanctuary. She wore a simple ivory silk dress, and her hair, now longer, fell in natural waves over her shoulders. Little William, who had just turned 2, played at her feet, concentrated on a game that only he understood. "You're beautiful." Michael's voice made her turn. He stood in the doorway, watching her with an admiration that time hadn't diminished. He wore a light suit, informal but elegant, perfect for the countryside celebration they had planned. "Nervous?" she asked, approaching to slightly adjust his tie. "About renewing my vows with the woman I love, this time legally and in front of all our loved ones," he replied with a smile. "Not at all." Emily laughed, appreciating how the years had softened Michael, transforming the reserved and tormented man she had met into someone capable of openly expressing his feelings. As the seasons had passed, she had learned that true love wasn't just passion and romance, but also mutual growth, sacrifice, and the courage to face difficult truths together. Her hands, once delicate and inexperienced, now carried honorable calluses from working the land. Her heart, once naive and fearful, had strengthened through the storms they had faced side by side. William stood up with the instability characteristic of his age and ran to his father, who lifted him in his arms with a fluid movement born of daily practice. "Mama pretty?" asked the boy, with that half-formed language that melted everyone's heart at the estate. "The prettiest in the world," Michael confirmed, winking at Emily. "Shall we go? The guests must be arriving." The main courtyard, where the ceremony would be held, was already full of life. Friends and family conversed animatedly, creating that warm murmur that Emily associated with shared happiness. She saw Jennifer, now a regular and welcome presence in their lives, talking with Mr. Parker, the vineyard foreman. Mr. Thompson, the old groundskeeper, held a glass of wine while relating some story that made a group of young estate workers laugh. And there in a quiet corner, a surprise that Michael had organized as a gift for her, Sarah, accompanied by David, now her husband. She had recovered almost all her mobility, though she walked with the aid of an elegant cane. Her face, thinner and more marked than in the photographs Emily had seen, radiated a serenity that spoke of battles won and peace found. The connection between the two women had been unexpectedly profound since their first meeting, as if sharing love for the same man, albeit at different times, had created a bond that transcended jealousy or competition. Sarah had become a kind of older sister to Emily, offering wisdom and perspective that only someone with her unique experience could provide. The ceremony was simple but full of meaning. Under an arch of vine branches intertwined with wisteria flowers, Emily and Michael renewed the vows they had pronounced years before, this time with the certainty that only comes from having faced the most difficult tests together. "I promise to love you in plenty and in want, in sickness and in health," said Michael, holding Emily's hands in his. "But above all, I promise to love you in truth, without secrets, without shadows, building each day on the honesty we've learned to value above all else. I promise to be your companion in each dawn and each nightfall," Emily responded, with a firm voice despite her emotion. "Your equal in decisions, your support in difficulties, your confidant in moments of doubt. And I promise to always remind you that our love isn't perfect, but it's real and strong, tempered by the fire of the trials we've overcome." William, who had been surprisingly calm in Mrs. Jenkins' arms, chose that moment to escape and run to his parents, creating an involuntary but perfect ending for the ceremony. Michael lifted him up, and the three shared an embrace that sealed their promises better than any additional words could have done. The celebration extended well into the night, There was music, dancing, abundant food, and exceptional wine, including a special vintage that Emily had personally supervised. The foundation they had created together had already transformed the lives of dozens of women in the region, and many of them were present, sharing success stories and new dreams. When most of the guests had departed and only the closest remained, Michael took Emily's hand and guided her to the oldest vineyard. There, under the moonlight that silvered the leaves of the century-old vines, he handed her a small leather-bound book. "It's my latest collection," he explained, with a shyness that contrasted with his usual confidence. "But this one is different." Emily opened the book and discovered that, unlike Michael's previous collections, this one didn't contain letters from strangers. They were letters he himself had written to her during the last 2 years, one each month, narrating his thoughts, his hopes, his fears, his growing love. Letters he had never sent, but had written as a way to process his feelings and preserve the significant moments of their life together. "The last one is blank," she noted, reaching the end of the book. Michael smiled, taking a fountain pen from his pocket. "Because I want us to write it together. Here and now, seated under the oldest vine in the estate, with the moon as witness and the scent of wisteria floating on the night breeze, they wrote the letter that would complete the collection. It wasn't a conventional love letter, with grandiose promises or passionate declarations. It was a letter to the future, to their son, to the children who might come later, to the generations who would one day walk through these same vineyards. In it, they told the truth of their story. The difficult beginnings, the lies, the pain, but also the forgiveness, the growth, the patient construction of a love based on honesty and mutual respect. They ended with a reflection that summarized everything they had learned in their journey together. True love isn't finding someone perfect, but seeing perfectly an imperfect person. It's choosing, each day, to build together something greater than each one separately. It's forgiving not 7 times, but 70 times 7. It's growing together, sometimes painfully, toward the light. And above all, it's recognizing that the scars we carry aren't marks of failure, but maps that have led us exactly to where we needed to be, beside each other, under this vine that has seen centuries pass and will remain here long after we have gone. This is our legacy to you. Not a perfect love, but a true one. Not a path without obstacles, but the certainty that obstacles can become steps if faced together, with courage and honesty. With all our love, Emily and Michael. When they finished writing, the silence that enveloped them was full of a peace that only comes from the deep certainty of being exactly where one should be, with exactly the person with whom one should be. The whisper that Michael had made that first night, "Are you ready?" finally had complete meaning. It wasn't just about physical intimacy, but about a journey of transformation that would prepare her to become the strong, independent, and loving woman she had always had the potential to be. The greatest romance of her life hadn't been just with him, but with the person she had become through that love. And as they returned to the estate, hand in hand under a starry sky that seemed to bless each step they took, Emily knew she was, finally and without reservations, ready for whatever life would bring. Because now they walked together, not as 2 separate people united by circumstances or convenience, but as true companions whose love had been forged in the fire of truth and tempered in the waters of forgiveness. The scent of wisteria enveloped them once more, as on that first night, but now each breath was full of fulfilled promises and shared dreams. Whispers of wisteria that, like their love, would bloom year after year, season after season, eternally renewing under the California sun.